Hello, and welcome to a workshop about evaluating news sources. This National News Literacy Week, it's so important for us to build our skills at identifying and navigating the world of information, misinformation, and good journalism. So, my goal today is to talk about the state of the news, common misinformation issues, so that you can spot them, what good journalism looks like so that you can spot that, and how to see better quality news. The information world looks a little bit like this in general. We have some wonderful things, beautiful fish and coral in this graphic, but we also have a bunch of garbage, discarded plastic bottles and bags and tin cans. And when we move through the world, we have to navigate through the junk to find the good stuff. My overarching goal for today is to help you pause and think before you share or believe information. But my goal is to help you know exactly what to think about when you pause. I think it's always useful to acknowledge why it matters whether information is true or not. And this could be a whole big conversation, but I'll highlight a few key points. Believing or sharing misinformation can increase hate towards certain groups of people that information is, slandering or otherwise creating worry or concern or fear about. In general, misinformation tends to increase division. It's also something that creates a public that's uninformed. And this can mean that we act against our own interests or even vote against our own interests. This can be something as small as taking a medicine that we believe will help us, but actually causes a health issue, or as big as making major life decisions that are based on things that are not true. The other reason it matters is because when we use incorrect information at school or at work, it lowers our credibility and does not really help us with our intention of making an argument or showing evidence for why we're doing something. So it's important for us to find strong, accurate information to share. The internet has been a really wonderful thing that revolutionized the way that we share information, the way that we receive information. And it completely changed the landscape. But it also means that anyone can share information. This has been a democratization of that process and has been really wonderful in many ways, but it's also made it so much more complicated for us to navigate as information users. It's also introduced new ways for people to make money on this process. Clicks, ads that show up on a page we're on or on a search result page that we're on, the amount of time spent on a page, making purchases with affiliate links. All of these are ways that we can translate our time and energy that we're spent engaging with information into money for someone else. I have a screenshot here of Google AdSense, which is the page that many digital marketing teams will use to monitor quite a lot of that process. But there's a lot of different ways that this can be managed and a lot of different avenues for making money. Just to put it in perspective, Magna Global, an ad agency, reported $853 billion in net ad revenues in 2024. So there's big money here that has really incentivized a different type of creation of information that isn't always entirely focused on accuracy or quality. And that's the other element, is the algorithms that are built to promote us engaging with spending time on information have picked up on the fact that things that grab our attention and hold our attention are what's most important. This has very little to do with whether the information is true. So the algorithm tends to promote and encourage drama, sensationalism, fear mongering, clickbait across a lot of different types of platforms, which also isn't particularly helpful for getting to a sort of unbiased, neutral understanding of the world. So we tend to be sort of overwhelmed with a huge variety of content and information on often our digital devices that we have on us all of the time. A 2023 study found that teens received over 200 individual app notifications on their phones per day. A lot of us are getting our news in different ways, like from social media. 57% of adults report that, according to 2024 Pew Research Center study, which, as I mentioned earlier, is very different from earlier times when we may have engaged with news in a more sort of condensed time periods that we dedicated to a physical newspaper, time with a television, listening to a radio. Since 2005, more than 3,200 print newspapers have closed in the United States, which has left about half of our counties with little or no local news, according to a 2024 report from Northwestern. So not only are we evolving the way that we get media, but this has implications for these organizations that create news and their ability to maintain themselves and continue doing good reporting. And so this has left some gaps where there maybe isn't high quality information about certain things. And of course, whenever there's a gap like that in a market, there's always going to be someone rushing in to take advantage of it. And fake news websites now outnumber local news websites in the United States, according to a 2024 analysis by the organization NewsGuard. So the information world is exploding. There's so much information happening and coming at us and trying to get our attention. And it's very, very messy and complicated and probably a bit stressful if you're anything like me. The news and opinion and entertainment have blurred together on social media, especially in short form video, where we often get our news from news influencers who are providing maybe a skit or a little bit of an analysis, and often have no professional news background. They aren't journalists necessarily. This report from the Pew Research Center in association with another organization found that 4 in 10 US adults under 30 get their news from one of these news influencers who often post in that short form video format. And then the last piece in this puzzle is generative AI. People who are trying to get clicks and trying to produce content, get attention, maintain our attention longer, all of these things for money purposes, have realized that generative AI makes it really easy to mass produce content with very little manpower necessary, but then on the other hand, very little human oversight to ensure that information is accurate or of good quality. And that's where a lot of the fake news organizations and websites that we're seeing these days are really taking advantage of this technology. So news looks so very different these days, and it's a little bit overwhelming. It can be a lot. Let's break down a few different ways that misinformation can look so that you can identify it and thoughtfully engage with it. Along the way, I'll also talk about some strategies you can use to investigate whether something seems to be real or not. I also like to acknowledge at this point that while I generally use the term misinformation, there's really a spectrum between misinformation, which is a term that we use to describe information that's shared that is not intending to be misleading or mean or to have a horrible result. It's usually a mistake. Someone doesn't realize what they're sharing is wrong or misleading. But on the other hand, there is a lot of other um, types of this that may be called disinformation, where someone is deliberately lying or manipulating information in order to mislead a public. This may come from a bad actor, like a scammer or an extremist group who wants to trick the person reading that information. So there's a spectrum from deliberate, intentional, bad acting all the way to honest mistakes. And you will see that we often all participate in the spreading of incorrect information. The common misinformation problems I'm going to talk about in this section include the wrong origin or context, misleading headlines, impersonation, manipulated content, satire and comedy, opinion, marketing, bias, and propaganda, and bad statistics. Wrong origin is a great place to start. This example is a screenshot of a tweet that has a photo of a very crowded street. It's described as a march to end COVID-19. However, if we were to look into this a little further, we could see that the person who posted this image was not at this supposed event, and we're not exactly sure how they came to get the image. What we can do is see, is anyone else reporting this same thing? If there were this many people at this event, someone else probably was talking about it, probably another news organization at the least, if not another person who attended. And who first posted this image, if not this user? Reverse search is a really useful tool for this. There's a couple other tools that you can use, but the one that most of us have immediate access to is Google's image search, which they now call Google Lens. If I open this photo up in Google Chrome, I can right-click on it and choose to search with Google Lens. Or I could download the photo and go to the Google search bar and upload to search by image. When I do this, I will quickly see lots of results. It's apparent that this photo was published years before the tweet by a variety of news organizations, and it was a photo from a completely different event. There's a photo from a parade related to a sports event. I see this as being reported by the New York Times, by the Business Insider, and as I scroll, plenty of others. I also see some pages return results that are talking about this tweet or other times that that photo has been misused, talking about it as a joke or a meme. So reverse image searching has confirmed for me that that is not a photo of a march to end COVID-19. This can also happen extremely unintentionally when a post comes across our feed that has simply just been recirculated by the algorithm. For example, this is a post shared by the Washington Post, and the image is talking about border drownings related to a Texas clampdown on migrant policies. If I saw this in my feed and did not check the date, I may assume that this is about current events and new changes in policy around immigration. However, when I check the date, I see this is from December 8th, 2024. This is actually not in response to the most current events around immigration. Something you've probably heard many times is that our headlines can be misleading. Often this is described as clickbait, but it's not always intentional. And sometimes we have to take it upon ourselves to be informed users of information and read beyond the headline. This example here is a fun example because people said that Daniel Craig said James Bond should not be played by a woman. And the reality is that that's true, that's a fact. And this headline is a fact. It's just that it seems really misleading in the context of what he said next, which is that women should get other parts that are just as good as James Bond, and that there should simply be better parts for women and actors of color. So even if it's just reading the subheading on an article from a good news publication or taking a look at the full article to make sure you have the full context, there can be a complete change in the meaning of a single sentence or a headline. We also see this type of thing a lot when it comes to news that we might get via some sort of informal social media post. This is a screenshot of a TikTok video with a person who looks upset. The text reads, "Lead, arsenic, and other toxic heavy metals found in tampons. UC Berkeley School of Public Health has identified the presence of 16 different heavy metals. Lead was in 100% of the tampons they tested." This is a complex topic, and if this is the first you're hearing of it, you probably feel pretty alarmed. If you were to look into this a little further, you would quickly see that it's true. UC Berkeley did put out a study identifying heavy metals in common menstrual products, including lead and arsenic. So this is not factually incorrect. However, if you searched a little further, you would find articles with a lot more context. And again, you'd have to read past the headline in order to get that context. This NPR article does state in the title similar concerning statements, right, about toxic metals. However, the body of the text includes a lot more information and nuance. And so you see them describe quite extensively, even beyond what I have screenshotted here, that there's not enough information to link the metals to negative health effects, and that they need to do a lot more research in order to determine whether the presence of these heavy metals in these menstrual products is actually dangerous to the people using them at the levels they're at, and whether they're able to transfer out of the product and into the body. And if you were to continue reading, you'd see that the study used extreme conditions, extremely high heat, extremely corrosive chemicals in order to draw out these heavy metals, which are in no way similar to the experience of using a product in your body or in a body. So what started with a really scary message on TikTok can quickly become a much more nuanced and balanced story when we look a little further and read beyond the headline. Another issue we encounter is impersonation. This can look like a URL that seems really, really familiar, but is one letter off, or is a .net instead of a .org. But it's often a Photoshop that we find as an image on social media or somewhere else. This example appears to be from CNBC and has a headline describing Apple removing the clown emoji because they say that it is used as a dog whistle for far-right people. This is an incorrect screenshot. It was manipulated and it doesn't exist this way. They are using the CNBC logo and making it appear to be on that website in order to gain credibility to move this story along. However, if you were to go to the CNBC website, there is no such article. This was never published by them. This is related to manipulated content, another type of misinformation that we encounter. On the right here, we have an example of a video of former President Biden that was manipulated to make him appear to say something that he did not say. And on top of that, they added a CNN logo to impersonate the news organization and give the appearance of credibility. Again, if you went back to CNN or back to the original broadcast where he was speaking, you would see that he never said the things in this video. The other example on this screen is a poster of Taylor Swift saying that she wants you to vote for Donald Trump or alternatively Joe Biden. If you went back to Taylor Swift's official social media pages or even looked at the origin of where this image came from, you would quickly realize that this does not in any way appear to be authentic. More recently, we've seen an example where someone took a existing image and they edited the image ever so slightly to make it have some sort of specific resonance with our current moment. This photo was manipulated to add information on police that made it appear they were ICE, and onto someone who is being detained to add a Latinos for Trump to their t-shirt. When you find the origin of this photo, it's very clear that it's from a completely different time, and these people were not ICE, and this person being detained was not. There's no way to know what their political leanings were. You may even remember some kind of funny things that have come up that are AI generated, like this image of Pope Francis that was widely circulated at some point wearing some very fancy designer clothing and a golden chain and stuff like that. When you are navigating a world that has become even more complex with AI, there's a few things that you can look for that may help you. Any sort of discontinuity or incorrect anatomy are big clues that what you're looking at was AI generated. We always think of fingers and hands as being difficult for AI. But in this example, we also see this person's arm seems to be coming out of the person next to them. You may also find odd shadows as if light is coming from many different sources, and incomplete images, something started and never finished. And another distinguishing feature is this skin you see here, this sort of too perfect, glowy, smooth skin is very common amongst AI generated images. And once you clue into it, you'll probably start seeing it everywhere. When it comes to text created by AI, image generation doesn't do a very good job of creating text, but generative AI that works with language is obviously pretty good at it usually. Things you might look for in AI generated text might be contradictions. So, in one sentence, the dog was fine, and in the next sentence, the dog was not fine. Any sort of grammar or spelling errors, error messages, or the inclusion of a prompt. And in general, sites that are creating a ton of AI generated content with little human oversight are usually posting a lot. And so there's a general sense that there's too much too fast for it to have been done well, and that it's likely AI generated. Another issue we run into is satire or comedy that may not be immediately obvious. A couple things we can do to help with this is to look at who's posting it. If we don't know that poster, we may want to go look them up. And if we're not sure, still, we can look to see if anyone else is reporting the same thing. So, for example, I have a screenshot here that says Biden cut his NATO summit short to squeeze in a chocolate tour of Brussels. A quick search confirms that no one else is saying this, and so it's very likely that this is a one-off satirical news story. The other thing that helps us understand this is that we know in this case that it comes from The Onion. Some of you may be familiar with it. If you are not, you could look up to see what does the source say about itself and what do other people say about it. I describe this as opening a new tab. The Onion describes itself as a leading news publication. However, there's a lot of other clues in here, including the fact that they describe having a daily readership of 4.3 trillion, which is way more people than there are in the world, and a lot of other suspicious little details that seem like they might just be a little bit silly, including the fact that they claim their origin in 1756, which is quite a long time ago. When you look up to see what others say about The Onion, you'll quickly see that they are understood as a satirical news publication and have always been so. The Onion is relatively straightforward about who they are. Some organizations are a lot less forthcoming. but it's very important to know what you're reading. Is it just to entertain you or to make a point, or is it really trying to share some facts? On that point, another common issue is that we tend to not distinguish between opinion stories and fact or straight news stories. This is become even trickier because our digital news feeds and our social media feeds combine opinion stories and news stories in a way that a print newspaper or a print magazine doesn't really do. This screenshot is from a Google search for news literacy. It suggests some top stories, but both of the top stories are actually opinion pieces. One is described as from the editor, and the other says opinion. Both of those are phrases you can look for to identify an opinion article. Other key phrases you can look for are editorial, op-ed, column or columnist, perspective, or commentary. That means you're not just getting straight facts, not just purely facts. You're also getting opinion. This is a screenshot from the Wall Street Journal's website where they clearly paint the picture that news and opinion are separate. Most journalistic guidelines enforce this as a entirely separate team working on each of these with their own expectations and very, very, very little interaction between them. The other thing we can do is look at the content in an article to help us determine if it's an opinion or a fact. Facts are checkable. They can be confirmed or denied. Opinions are based on a belief or a value or a feeling, and those are much trickier to say yes or no, they are or are not right. These are some examples. An opinion would be the Catholic Church should allow the use of birth control. A fact would be 83% of Catholics in the US say the church should allow the use of birth control. We could look that up and we would find sources, including the one I cite here, a Pew Research Center study from 2024 that confirms this information. An opinion would be Pope Francis is the best pope ever. A fact would be many Catholics in the US and Latin America have a favorable opinion of Pope Francis. Many of the information types that we encounter will mix facts and opinion and analysis and other types of approaches to information. What we want to do in order to be really news literate is identify what is really a fact and what is something that is likely to be true if we trust this source, but is still debatable. On that note, other types of things we run into are marketing, bias, even propaganda. This is where we ask ourselves, what is the purpose of this information being created and shared? Often information is shared because the origin or the creator has something to gain from it. And that's what we see a lot with marketing and advertising. We also see this in a lot of other ways. If a source only considers one perspective and does not acknowledge or allow the possibility that there are other reasonable perspectives or options, you're probably looking at something that's biased. And any information that is oversimplified, and especially one that's oversimplified and is seeking to gain a strong emotional reaction, is likely not the high quality information source you want. I have a screenshot here of what appears to be an informational social media post talking about 80% of households having experienced an ant problem. However, it was posted by Rottler Pest, a company that removes ants and other pests from households. So this is not purely informational. They have something to gain by sharing this. This is actually advertising. You will see what are called sponsored posts, sponsored content, or native advertising, even in many trusted news sources. So, this is from the Seattle Times website. This article looks very similar to any other article you'd find on their website. However, it is distinguished by a icon that says sponsored and by the fact that it's written by a restaurant and produced by a content studio. When you read this, it's very clearly written in a biased and not purely fact-based way to advertise the resources available through this restaurant. And you'll also see this in posters and other types of things. This example is from World War II. It's a poster created by the US government to encourage the buying of war bonds. We have this image of vulnerable, innocent children with their toys underneath the shadow of the Nazi swastika. And so this is eliciting an extremely strong emotional reaction, probably to feel that the only option to protect your children is to buy these war bonds. And this type of thing was likely important to our success in the war, but is not an unbiased informational source. The last thing I want to talk about in this section is bad statistics or graphs. This is a whole topic in and of itself, often described as data literacy, but I'm going to highlight a few key examples. One issue we run into is the difference between the average and the median or mean. These screenshotted graph at the bottom shows income of US families separated by age groups. And let's take a look at the 45 to 54 age range. The average is maybe $175,000 per year. That seems lovely as a US income. However, the median is a lot lower. The median is closer to $75,000 per year. And that big gap, $100,000 gap, is representative of the ways that averages are inflated by very high numbers of very few people or other types of discrepancies, whereas a median can be more telling about what the common person's experience is. Another issue we run into is graphs that may use axes that are misleading. So on the right side, we have a graph chart showing sales of the Times and the Daily Telegraph in 2007. We see that there appears to be a big lead by the Times. However, when we look at the axis, we realize that the difference is actually only about 40,000. Both of them have robust sales. So this graph has been zoomed in such a way as to make the difference seem more dramatic than it actually is. We also always want to consider how data was collected. For example, with science articles, if they studied men and how commonly a disease exists in men, they may report that 40% of men get this disease. However, that may be misleading if they did not look at it in any women, right? It may appear to imply that women don't have this issue, when in reality, the sample just did not look at women, or perhaps they asked someone a question that may have been oversimplified in a way that wasn't as helpful as it could be. There are so many questions we can get into with how data is collected, but it makes a big difference in the outcomes. So what does good news look like? Let's take a minute to talk about journalistic ethics, because they're actually very well established. They're detailed. There's something you can look up and read and study. There's 7 basic standards that we can think about. Balance, the idea of having multiple perspectives. Context, the idea of presenting information in a way that's clear and fair and accurate. Verification, only sharing things they have confirmed to be true. Fairness, meaning that they hear from both sides and are respectful about people involved and the situation at hand. This often looks like a statement that says, we reached out to the other party and they did not respond, if the other party has not responded. Documentation, meaning providing photos, videos, reports, data, evidence, right? An avoidance of a bias. High quality journalism is intended to be impartial and fact based, and using multiple credible sources. So, not just one source, using a variety of sources because true information should be able to be confirmed by others who also witness that same thing. Because of all this, really good journalism can often be slow. And so when there's breaking news, the very first reports are often extremely preliminary. They're likely very incomplete and not fully verified. They may not stand up to those 7 standards. And so when there is these big things happening in the news, one thing we have to do is be patient and allow that hard work to be done so that we can get these verified high quality news stories. Let's look at an example here. This is the New York Times. Who is the New York Times? They would describe themselves as an established news source that has very high standards for their conduct and their journalism. You can see a screenshot here of all kinds of different guidelines and codes of conduct that they have. If you look up the New York Times and hear from others about them, you'll see a similar story. They've won many awards for journalism. They're very well respected, but you'll also see that there's an entire section about controversies and in the Wikipedia page, which covers mistakes and other types of flaws. It's important to have a full picture of our news organizations and not view them as perfect. You can go to the citation next to any sort of note in Wikipedia in order to learn more about where that factoid came from. Now, if I see this article about the NCAA prioritizing men's basketball over everything else, I have a guess that because it's from the New York Times, it's probably been reviewed before publication. High quality news sources, as we've talked about, have this expectation that they will verify their sources. I can also go and take a closer look at their editorial guidelines that I showed earlier and see a lot of information, including detailed descriptions of fact checking and corrections. So if there was a mistake made, a high quality journalistic organization will release a correction. Often on the online versions, this means they'll add a little note that says, we changed this and this is why. We also may look at the expertise. In journalism, an expertise may be in collecting and reporting information. Sometimes people are specialized in a certain area. But if you're looking at something that is not a straight news article, you probably want to find someone who has another type of expertise, like lots of experience working in a field, an advanced degree in the field, or firsthand experience with something. Maybe they witnessed an event, maybe they know the experience of using a wheelchair because they have used a wheelchair. The author here, Alan Blinder, when we click on his link on his name, it's linked and it takes us to a page that shows a long list of other articles that he's written, a full career. He's described as a national correspondent for the New York Times, and in this case, he even specializes in the topic that he's talking about, education in America. Another really important factor in all types of information is how that information is known. So this can look a couple ways, right? It might be a link, it might be a name of a report or the name of an expert that we're interviewing. Sometimes something is formally cited APA style or MLA style, but that's a lot less common in journalism. If a organization has done their own original analysis and reporting, they should be very transparent about how they collected that data, how they analyzed it, how they did that research. In this particular article, we see them supporting the claims they're sharing with a source. They got this information from a review prepared by the civil rights litigator Roberta A. Kaplan and her law firm. If we look this up, we can quickly find the actual report as well as other articles talking about this topic. So there's further reading to do here, and others are able to corroborate this story. Let's look at another example. This article about the gunfire detection system in Chicago is from NPR. In the body of this article, we see them use many different sources. They quote people that they're interviewing who are experts on their topic. They link to research done by credible organizations like the MacArthur Justice Center at the Northwestern School of Law. There's a lot of different sources that are being brought together to paint the picture and providing both sides to the story. In the beginning, they describe why they may want to keep this gunfire detection system. There's more of that outside of the screenshot. And then they transition into talking about why some people don't want to have this system. And if I opened a new tab and searched, I would quickly see, again, this same information is being corroborated by plenty of other news sources. Other people are also talking about this story. This is my open a new tab approach that I think everyone should use. I also at this point always like to use this example because information is very complicated, and occasionally we will get information that is coming from a very authoritative figure, like this guidance about COVID-19 boosters that came from the Florida Health Department, specifically with a message from the state Surgeon General. The Surgeon General is a medical doctor. He has expertise in his field, and the Florida Health Department is authoritative in their field. They suggested that you should not get mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. This press release is on their website. This is not a news source because it only has their one perspective on this topic. The reason why news articles can be so useful is because they bring in multiple perspectives and complicate and add nuance. When I looked up this report from the Florida general surgeon, I quickly found Tampa Bay Times writing about this story. And they were quick to bring in other perspectives. And the other perspectives were from other experts who said this does not align with any of the other information that we have. This doesn't make sense to us. And so just because something is authoritative doesn't mean you should immediately assume that it's accurate. And when you're looking at what we might think of as primary source, like a press release or a picture someone releases on social media of an event that they're witnessing, it can be useful to go to a real journalistic source to get a bigger picture context of them doing the work that they're really good at and using their journalistic guidelines to provide a balanced and accurate perspective. All right. We've talked through all kinds of issues around information. How do we see more good news? Let's talk about seeing better quality news. I think of this as my news diet. How can I improve my diet that I have of news and information? One of the best things you can do is seek out strong sources. Go find and follow trusted news sources for your country, for your local county, for your city, for topics that you care about, whether that's sports or video gaming. Whether you follow them through a newsletter, in your email, through social media, by downloading an app and turning on your notifications, this improves the amount of high quality news that you're getting. If you interact with that content in a system that uses an algorithm like social media or a news app, this will also encourage the app to provide you more high quality content. I always recommend a few strong options to get started. Associated Press, Reuters, PBS, and BBC are some really strong options. You'll also probably end up following people who are not just journalists or not journalists at all, but people who do have expertise and are good at translating information and sharing it with other people. These are two people that I really like to follow on social media because they are very transparent about both their credentials and their sources. Dr. Knock is a PhD scientist who talks about science, and Zachary Rubin is a medical doctor, an allergist who talks about medical issues. You may also want to follow a source like Washington Post Universe. They create skits that are based on articles that are linked in their bio from the Washington Post, straight news stories that you can go read to learn more. But they share it with you in a more entertaining short form video format. You also want to support your local news. I mentioned earlier seeking out and following your local news. And support them with views and online engagement, and potentially consider subscribing to them or making a donation so that you can support them financially as well. As I mentioned at the beginning, local news organizations are struggling in these new information times, and they are so essential to our ability to understand the world around us. And so, if you appreciate what they're doing, consider supporting their high quality journalism. I mainly have been talking about seeking out, following things. The other element is unfollowing. When you come across something on your dash that is misinformation or that is obfuscating where the information came from, or sensationalizing, or clickbaiting, that is trying to trick you in any way, bye bye. Go ahead and unfollow that. That puts you in control. Speaking of that, any system that uses an algorithm will have some sort of option to allow you to customize what it suggests. And so if you were not following something, but it's suggested to you, you should look for something like a 3-dot option that allows you to open an option menu and then click something like not interested, or see less content like this, or don't show content from this user or this organization. All of these are tools that you can use to stop seeing low quality content that you don't care about or that is not trustworthy. Another thing you can do that allows you to identify issues that are coming up in the news or misunderstandings that are happening, misinformation, is to allow someone else to do the work for you by following fact checkers. These are people who are doing the work of finding these things that are trending, these misleading statements or images, and investigating them to figure out where they came from and whether they're reliable or not. PolitiFact is a nonprofit that's extremely well established and has a social media presence as well as a website. Factcheck.org is another example. And of course, there's always Snopes. All of these are options that you can interact with in your daily life through whatever feed you're already using, or by subscribing to an email newsletter or whatever you prefer. Something I really enjoy is the Rumor Guard. It's an email newsletter from the News Literacy Project that captures viral rumors and then describes exactly how we know that they're true or not true, and what issues came up that made the issue confusing for people. I find this to be super educational, but also very useful because occasionally I may have heard that rumor as well and not realized that it is based on misinformation. Ultimately, you're in charge of the information you get, as much as it may feel like the different algorithms and things are what is choosing what you get. You have options, and your time is worth it, as is your energy. You don't need to spend your energy on things that aren't true or are misleading. You need to spend your time on things that are true and are quality journalism. So take the time to curate what you find. The last thing I'll mention to help you find more high quality news is to make sure that you're not getting stuck in a filter bubble. Following organizations that report broadly and impartially is a good place to start. But you may also need to go and search for information sometimes. And a lot of the places where we search for information have some sort of profile where they have an understanding of who you are and what results you want that they use to determine what they give in response to your search. Google search does this, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram do this. Um, a lot of the places where you interact are customizing your search results based on what they think you want to see. And so if you were to search through a different type of search engine, like DuckDuckGo or Start Page, you would still be able to get those high quality search results you're used to, and they would be the same that anyone searching that question on that platform would get. So this is a really useful way to make sure you're not missing something because the algorithm thinks you don't care about it or that you don't want to see it. It's important to see lots of different perspectives in order to have a full and nuanced picture of what's happening around a new invention or a breaking news topic or whatever it might be. Like I said, DuckDuckGo and Start Page are two free options that I'm a really big fan of and I highly recommend. The other thing that you can do is use a library search engine. These never make assumptions about who you are and what you want, whether that's your public library or AU's Phillips Library. These are high quality materials that are not locked behind paywalls, and you are in control of what you find based on the search that you build. These are some of the references from the things that I talked about today. I hope that you learned something new and you feel better prepared to handle the onslaught of information that we all encounter every day. You are in control of what you see, and you have the capacity to weed out misinformation and be a news literate and really confident navigator of this information. Of course, if you have questions about these topics, please feel free to ask a librarian. We love talking about news literacy and helping people find high quality sources, and we're always happy to help. Happy News Literacy Week. Stay well.